Hello, it's me, Batman, at least. Almost. Today, I'm going to show you how to make this without having to go to the gym. It's that simple. What you need is a mannequin, sculpt on, or any old body form. Some clay, sculpt with. It could be oil-based clay, air-dried clay, whichever you could afford. Tools. Molding plaster. Liquid latex. A Dremel. Finally, to color it, some plasti dip. So, without further ado, let's get on it. My belt!
Yes, before you say anything, I know that intro is really awkward. Anyway, for sculpting, I don't really have that much of a tutorial on it. If you want to know how to sculpt, just look at YouTube videos online. That's pretty much what I did, and that's how I got to where I am now. What you're seeing me do there is trace the shape of the sculpt onto the water-based clay, which I'm going to create into a clay wall, because what we're going to do is we're going to mould this out of plaster, and we're going to do a two-part mould. And you're going to want to create a clay wall around your sculpt, which will be a barrier between both halves, which will be why it's a two-part mould. You're going to want to make it nice and flush on the actual sculpt, which is why I traced around it. Do that around the whole area, and you're going to want to put some keys in. This is so that the two halves can actually slot together. I used an old battery for this. Any old object will do, anything that's a recognisable shape. Preferably round, because round shapes are really good for enclosing on each other. To mix up your plaster, try and make it a nice creamy consistency. As you can see there, it's not dripping at all or anything, it's actually quite nice and thick. For the first layer, you're going to want to actually slather it all over the mould, but make it sure that it's nice and thin on there, because you don't want any air bubbles in the plaster. Because if you have any air bubbles, then it's going to look really bad on the cast. When it's dry, it will be nice and matte instead of wet like this. I did about 4 layers on the front piece, because it's, you know, that's the piece that needs to be really nice and thick. So you're going to want to leave that to set for about half an hour before you go on to the next half. And to prepare the next half, you're going to want to, of course, take the clay wall off, because you don't need that anymore. And as you see there, the keys on the plaster actually comes off really nicely. For water-based clay, which is what I use, the reason I use that for the clay wall is because it comes off really well of oil-based clay, which is the clay I actually sculpted with. And these little things, these little sausages, are so that you can actually put tools in there for later, and you're going to see why in a bit. Put it all around the clay wall and put some Vaseline on the exposed plaster so that the plaster doesn't actually stick to itself, because you don't want that. So I skipped doing the second half of the mould because it's pretty much the same as the first half, just not as big. What you're seeing me do here is I'm trying to pick away between the dividing line of both halves of the plaster, because I put Vaseline over the actual border of the first half, so then plaster which goes onto there will actually come right off. So I'm actually chiseling away at it so I can see where the little clay sausages are, because what you're going to want to do is you want to actually get one of your tools actually in there so that it can actually get in there and pry the halves apart. I used to hammer usually to get it apart. As you see there, the knife is sticking into one of the little sausages there. You can use any tool for this, screwdrivers, dirty scissors, or a batarang, which is what I'm using there, a nice steel batarang. You're going to want to hammer your little tools in there, so then it starts to create a crack actually between both halves, if you've done it right. If you haven't done it right, well, you're going to have a really hard time. And for you, what you want to do now is you're going to want to start prying it apart. As you see there, the back half is coming off very nicely. Only problem is it actually cracked down the back. But that's okay because it's the back, it's going to be covered up by a cape. Now the front half is going to be the hard part because that's where all the detail is. I found that actually twisting the arms upward actually causes the plaster to actually come away from the actual mannequin, which was absolutely fantastic, and I actually was able to get the arms off. And then I just lifted it up, and there we go, it's all off. And as you see there, it actually took most of the clay with it. So you're going to want to actually clean up the mould right now, which is what we're going to get onto right next. Oil-based clay is actually really easy to get out of a plaster mould because it's oil instead of water, which is of course what the plaster is actually used is actually made of. And if you do have any oil-based clay stuck in there, you're going to want to get a plastic tool just to chip it out. Not a metal tool, because metal is actually harder than the plaster and it will actually cause it to scratch. There, as you see there, I actually was able to get both halves together quite well. And since I used water-based clay for the clay wall, I'm going to want to actually clean that off. And this is a good way to say, if you're using water-based clay, just use water to get rid of it. Because if you use water, then it will thin down the clay and then it will actually just come away. So I just get like a damp tissue and just wipe it away. You're going to want to do that for the rest of the mould as well, even if it is oil based. What you see me doing now is I'm actually tapping the back of it so that any debris comes out of the actual mould, because you don't want that in the actual cast. There we are, just doing it again just to see. But this isn't going to keep it together if you hold it like that. You're going to want to actually really make them really tight together. And I usually use a belt for this, but right now I'm using duct tape. And you're going to want to make it really tight. You're going to want to make it so airtight, because if any latex leaks out, it's just going to get everywhere and you're going to waste quite a bit of your precious moulding material. And I used about three good long helpings of tape just to make sure that it's really nice and tight. And the only thing is, duct tape doesn't actually stick to it, which is quite annoying. And I found it really annoying doing this here, which was trying to seal up the neck. I did it fairly well, but there were still areas that weren't actually sealed up, and the latex actually seeped out of the neck hole, which was quite annoying because I actually wasted quite a bit of latex. But hey, these things happen, and it's really a learning curve for this. And what I did there is I actually sealed up the top of the dividing line. So you're going to want to get your latex, and to colour latex you can just put acrylic paint in it, put the top back on and shake the container about. This is much better than just stirring it, because if you shake it about you get the whole thing nicely mixed. And just shake it as much as you can, and usually you will see it mixed in the actual container. It will turn grey. And yes, I pigmented it black, but it will turn grey when it's wet because it actually dries a lot darker when it's set. And the casting technique which I'm doing here is a slush cast, which is slushing the latex about and just covering the whole area. And the thing is with this plaster mould, especially since it's the torso, was really heavy. So just take your time doing this, because this is of course the most important part of the whole process, because this is actually making the piece which you spent a long time sculpting up. I'm mixing up quite a bit in this narration, aren't I? So yeah, just make sure you get the whole area covered, because if you don't, then you're just going to get holes in your cast, and it's just then sealing it up afterwards is just a pain. You're going to want to do this for about 6 or 7 layers, and you can use a hairdryer or a heat gun on the lowest setting just to speed up the process. And if you're doing this, make sure you get it everywhere, because if you do it in one area, it's not going to go on the heat isn't going to transfer to the rest of the mould. Okay, so after you've cast it up, which should take quite a while, you're going to want to actually put some upholstery foam inside, because even it doesn't matter how thick you make the latex, it's still going to be very floppy, and since this is a muscle suit, you don't want floppy muscles. And the way I actually glue it in is I actually stipple latex inside the mould and stipple some on the surface of the foam, and just heat it up just for a couple of seconds, and then press it in. Because if you press it in, then the latex will adhere to the latex on both sides. You're going to want to cut away the tape, and as you see there, loads of latex actually spilled out onto the tape, which was a nightmare to get off because, you know, latex sticking onto the sticky side of duct tape. So now you're going to want to do the fun part, which is actually demolding it. What I'm doing here is I'm actually putting some talcum powder inside, because latex has a really nice habit of sticking to itself, and of course you don't want that. So just put some powder inside and cover the whole area. Got nothing to say here, I'm just putting powder on the inside. And now peel away the back side of the mould. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to actually take the back side of the mould off. And as you see there, it came apart again, but well, I'm not really that bothered. And there you go, you can actually see all the latex inside the seam. And then peel away the front half of the cast. Now this is really fun to do, this is so satisfying to do, this is my favourite part. And there you go, you will have a torso. A very ugly, discoloured torso. You're going to want to clean it up, especially the seam area, because the seam area is really, really horrible. And even if you wear a cape, you're still going to want to just clean it up just because. You're going to want to cut away as much of the seam area as you can, as much as the flashing. But try not to cut too much, or else you're going to actually create holes in the seam area, and then you know, it doesn't tear, but it will be very, very obvious. And then you're going to want to actually just glue some latex in the back of it just to seal it up, and then it will just be a real pain just to like make it all pretty. So yeah, try and be very careful when you're cutting it. Cut away as much as you can, but not too much. Once you cut away enough, go in with a Dremel. What I'm using here is a very fine a little Dremel bit, but I actually recommend using a very soft Dremel bit because latex isn't very good for sanding down. In fact, it's actually, you shouldn't really sand down latex, because latex isn't like urethane rubber where it will be nice and clean. It will actually start to fray in all the areas which you Dremeled away. What I did here was I actually put latex around the seam just to fill it in and make it look better. You're not going to be able to get the seam perfectly smooth or film accurate, but hey, loads of people worked on the film and you're only one person, so don't beat yourself up too much about it. Okay, so now on to actually painting it. This is some Plasti Dip which I got, and I make sure you spray this in a well ventilated area, which is why I'm doing it outside. Because you don't want to breathe in these fumes. These fumes are actually really, really horrible. I should actually be wearing a respirator here, but I can't actually find it, so I was like, sod it, I'll just spray it. Which I kind of regretted because I felt really lightheaded afterwards, so there you go. You're going to want to make sure you do it in quite nice, thin, even strokes. Make sure that you cover the whole thing and have it on one set colour. And Plasti Dip is actually a rubber spray paint, which is used for... Hello, it is me in real life again, wearing quite of a lavish outfit. So the last thing you want to do now is to actually attach your latex piece to an undersuit, and this is what it looks like now. Completely, let me just get it in the light. There you go, all completely Plasti Dipped, all lovely. That's what it should look like right now, if you've done it right. So you're going to want to get some Velcro, which is what I've got here. You can't really see it because it's, you know, black on black. And just, you don't have to use Velcro, you can just glue it onto the suit straight away. You can really do what you like with this, to be honest. It's your costume, so you can do whatever you absolutely like. It's absolutely your plan, whatever. So, the glue which I just use like any old adhesive. You can use super glue, you can even use like latex onto the inside of it. But I find that on the latex, if you've got self-adhesive Velcro, the self-adhesive actually holds up pretty well to the rubber. But I would say, just for safe measure, don't use that, as the be-all end-all. Try and reinforce it with some super glue. Okay, so then pop the suit on. Now my neck went through quite nicely there. Alright, so got a mirror right here, so I'm just going to line it all up so then it all sits really well. Right on the arms, Velcro everywhere, just so it sits really nicely. And if you are Velcroing it like I am, try and see if you can get some stretch on it. Because if you get some stretch on the actual thing, it will look tighter and it will look better in the long run. So, just do it that way. As I said, do what you feel is best. If it's too tight, don't make it too. If you don't want it too tight, don't make it too tight. If you don't want it too loose, don't make it too loose. And there you are. There is the muscle sculpt. If you followed it like in the tutorial which I've just done, which you just watched, then it should be fairly, successful. But if not, you can always just try again. I mean, this isn't my first time I've made this. This is probably not the third time I've done a full latex torso. So it really comes with experience. So I knew that I could do this, so that's why I did it. So yes, I hope you all enjoyed.